I was 58 years old when I discovered my life was built on a lie. Standing in a delivery room, watching a nurse avoid my eyes as my wife gave birth to a daughter who couldn't possibly be mine. After 20 years of marriage, countless sacrifices, and months spent building the perfect nursery with my own hands, I faced the undeniable truth reflected in my newborn's features. The silence in that hospital room told me everyone knew, the doctor, the nurses, perhaps even friends, while I had been the loyal fool believing in our family's future. The betrayal wasn't just the affair. It was the elaborate deception, the stolen joy of fatherhood, and the public humiliation that stripped away my dignity in what should have been life's most sacred moment. What does a man do when everything he believed crumbles in an instant? How does he reclaim his life when the betrayal is displayed for all to see? The nursery was finally complete. I stepped back to admire the pale yellow walls I'd painted 3 times to get the shade just right, the handcrafted oak crib that had taken me weekends to build and finish, and the bookshelf filled with classics I'd been collecting since Caroline announced her pregnancy. At 58, I never expected to become a father. We'd spent our first 15 years focused on careers, mine in engineering, hers in marketing, before the conversation shifted to, maybe someday, starting a family. Then, as these things often do, someday slipped away until it seemed too late. When Caroline told me she was pregnant at 56, we both called it our miracle. I threw myself into preparations with the methodical dedication that had defined my professional life. The nursery had been my obsession for months, a tangible expression of the joy I couldn't quite believe was finally mine. I ran my hand along the crib railing, checking once more for any rough spots that might someday harm our child. My father had taught me woodworking, one of the many skills I'd hoped to pass down. His photo sat on the dresser, him holding me as an infant, placed there as a bridge between generations. He'd died just last year, never knowing he would have had a grandchild. The thought created a familiar ache. "It's perfect, Mark." Carolyn stood in the doorway, one hand resting on her prominent belly. "You've thought of everything." I smiled, still feeling that surge of pride and anticipation whenever I looked at her. "Just want everything to be ready. Only 3 weeks to go." Her phone buzzed, a near constant occurrence these days. She glanced at it, a brief expression crossing her face I couldn't quite identify before she silenced it. "Work never stops. The Dennison account is in crisis mode again." "At 8 o'clock on a Saturday?" I asked mildly. "You know how it is. Clients don't respect weekends." She slipped the phone into her pocket. "I need to make a call." "Shouldn't take long." I nodded, turning back to adjust a picture frame as she walked away. In the quiet that followed, I could hear her voice from our bedroom, tone hushed despite the closed nursery door between us. Something in the cadence caught my attention, not her client voice, which I knew well after 20 years. This held a different note, intimate and guarded. I shook off the thought. Caroline had been under tremendous pressure, balancing pregnancy with her executive role. Her doctor had warned about stress levels, and I'd made it my mission to create calm around her. If she needed privacy for work calls, I could give her that. When the doorbell rang, I headed downstairs, finding a delivery person with a package. "Delivery for Caroline Harris," he said, holding out an electronic pad to sign. I scrawled my signature as Caroline's voice drifted down the stairs, suddenly sharp. "No, that won't work. I told you." She stopped abruptly, noticing the open door. The delivery man glanced up, catching the tension in her voice. Our eyes met in an awkward moment of shared discomfort before he handed me the package and retreated. "Everything okay?" I called up the stairs, setting the package on the hall table. Caroline appeared at the top, composed once more. "Fine, just frustrated with the creative team. They're missing deadlines again." She came down, eyeing the package. "What's that?" "Delivery for you." She took it without looking at the label. "Probably those pregnancy vitamins I ordered." Later that afternoon, I helped Caroline unload groceries from her car, reaching into the back seat for a reusable bag when a receipt fluttered to the ground. I picked it up, registering the Parkview Hotel logo at the top, dated 3 weeks earlier, room service charges, a dinner for two. "What's this?" I asked, more confused than suspicious. Caroline snatched it from my hand. "Oh, that. Client dinner last month. I forgot to submit it for reimbursement." She crumpled it, shoving it into her pocket. "Would you grab that last bag? Ice cream's melting." I did as she asked, the moment passing as we continued unpacking groceries. But that night, as Caroline slept beside me, the memory of her quick reaction nagged at me. In 20 years, I'd never known her to pay for client dinners personally. The company had strict expense account protocols she followed religiously. Just stress, I told myself. Pregnancy brain. Perfectly normal explanations that were far more likely than the alternative my mind shied away from considering. The following Thursday, I met David for our standing lunch at Myers Diner. We'd been friends since college, his legal career having taken a different path than my engineering one, but our monthly lunches had been a constant for decades. "Earth to Mark," David said, waving his fork. "You haven't heard a word I've said." I blinked, forcing myself back to the present. "Sorry." Distracted. "Baby preparations keeping you up at night?" He smiled, but his eyes held a note of concern. "Something like that." I pushed my barely touched sandwich aside. "Did Caroline mention she had a doctor's appointment last week, Thursday afternoon?" David set down his fork. "No, but I saw her having lunch at Costelli's with some guy. Assumed it was a client meeting." He watched me carefully. "Why do you ask?" "She told me she had a prenatal appointment." The words hung between us, neither of us addressing their implication. "Could have been before or after," David suggested, but his tone had changed. "Mark, is everything okay with you two?" "Of course," I said automatically. "Just pregnancy brain. She's juggling a lot." David nodded, but something in his expression, concern mixed with what looked like hesitation, stayed with me long after we'd parted ways. That night, instead of dismissing the inconsistencies that had been accumulating, I allowed myself to consider them directly. The late work calls, the hotel receipt, the doctor's appointment that apparently never happened. I didn't want to doubt Caroline, but for the first time, I decided to pay closer attention. Tax season provided the perfect excuse. With April approaching, I spent a Saturday organizing our financial records, a task Caroline had always been happy to leave to me. In our home office, surrounded by neatly labeled folders, I began reviewing credit card statements from the past year. The pattern emerged slowly. Thursday dinners charged to restaurants across town, not near her office. Sporadic hotel charges, always the same hotel, always on Thursdays. Jewelry purchases that I'd never seen Caroline wear. The earliest charges dated back 14 months, well before the pregnancy. Each discovery felt like a physical blow, yet I kept searching, part of me hoping to find an explanation that would restore my trust. When Caroline appeared in the doorway, I closed the laptop quickly, irrationally afraid she might somehow see the thoughts forming in my mind. "Still working on taxes?" she asked, one hand resting on her 8-month belly. "You've been at it for hours." "Almost done," I managed. "Just reconciling some charges." "Well, don't forget we have dinner with the Blakes tonight." She hesitated. "Everything balancing out?" For a moment, I considered confronting her with what I'd found, but some instinct held me back. "Just a few questions. Nothing I can't figure out." She nodded, seemingly relieved, and headed back downstairs. I turned to our shared calendar, examining the past several months. Every Thursday, Caroline had blocked time for client meetings or department reviews, never varying in their timing, always from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. or later. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through photos from the past year, looking for changes I might have missed. Caroline at Christmas, her smile tight at the edges. Caroline's birthday dinner in March, checking her phone repeatedly. Caroline at my father's funeral, standing slightly apart from me, even in my grief. Had the distance been growing all this time while I was too preoccupied to notice, or had I simply chosen not to see? The following day brought unexpected clarity from an unexpected source. I was trimming the hedges that separated our yard from Eleanor Wilson's. Eleanor had been our neighbor for 15 years, a retired teacher whose husband had passed away shortly after they moved in. She was weeding her garden when she spotted me. "Mark, just the person I wanted to see. Could you look at my garage door opener? It's making that grinding noise again." "Of course," I said, setting down my clippers. Eleanor had become something of a surrogate mother over the years, and small repairs were the least I could do. In her garage, as I examined the opener's motor, Eleanor handed me tools and made casual conversation. "How's Caroline feeling these days? The last few weeks can be the hardest." "She's doing well, busy with work." "I imagine so. I see her car coming and going at all hours." Eleanor passed me a wrench. "That apartment building downtown where she goes, is that where her company moved their offices? The one on Westbrook Avenue?" My hand stilled. "Her office is on Commerce Street, has been for years." Eleanor's expression shifted to one of immediate regret. "Oh, I must be confused. Senior moment, I suppose." "What apartment building, Eleanor?" I kept my voice neutral, despite the sudden pounding of my heart. She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "The Westbrook Towers. I noticed her car there several times when I was visiting my friend Judith, who lives in the building." "And I just assumed." She trailed off, watching my face. "Mark, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said anything." "It's fine," I assured her, though nothing felt fine. "How long have you been seeing her car there?" "I don't know exactly. A year, maybe. Usually Thursday evenings." She put a gentle hand on my arm. "Mark, I'm sure there's an explanation." I nodded, focusing on completing the repair, though my mind was elsewhere. The Westbrook Towers were luxury apartments, far from any clients Caroline had ever mentioned. "There's something else," Eleanor said quietly, as I packed up the tools. "I wasn't going to mention it, but I saw Caroline having dinner with a man at Rossetti's about 2 months ago. It's out by the interstate, good 30 miles from here." "A client, probably," I said automatically. Eleanor's eyes held mine. "They were holding hands across the table, Mark. I'm sorry." The confirmation hit harder than I expected, even after my own discoveries. An outside perspective removed any possibility of explaining away what I'd found. Caroline was having an affair, had been for at least a year, and now was pregnant. I thanked Eleanor and walked back to my own yard in a daze, mechanically returning to the hedge trimming. The rational part of my brain began calculating dates, remembering when Caroline had announced her pregnancy, counting backward. The timeline made my stomach clench. If she was truly 8 months along now, conception would have been right around the time of those hotel charges last summer. That evening, after a dinner where I barely tasted the food, I decided to approach the subject cautiously. We sat in the living room, Caroline reviewing work documents while I pretended to read. "I ran into Eleanor today," I began. "She mentioned seeing you at Westbrook Towers recently. Client meeting?" Caroline's hand paused almost imperceptibly before continuing to flip through her papers. "She must be confused." "I've never had meetings there." That's what I thought, I said, watching her carefully. She also mentioned seeing you at Rossetti's a while back. Now Caroline looked up, her expression hardening slightly. Is there a question in there somewhere, Mark? I'm just trying to reconcile some things that don't make sense. Credit card charges that don't align with your schedule, places you've been that don't connect to your work. Are you checking up on me? Her voice rose slightly. Going through credit card statements? Talking to neighbors about my whereabouts? That sounds disturbingly controlling, especially with everything I'm dealing with right now. I'm not controlling anything, Caroline. I'm asking simple questions because things aren't adding up. What exactly are you accusing me of? She set aside her papers, one hand moving protectively to her belly. I'm not accusing. I'm asking. It sounds like accusations to me. Her eyes narrowed. Is this really what you want to do right now? Create stress for me, for the baby, because you're feeling insecure? Is that the kind of father you're planning to be? The deflection was so skillful I almost fell for it. But her defensive response only confirmed my suspicions. Still, I backed down, unwilling to create a scene without irrefutable evidence. You're right. Bad timing. I'm sorry. She nodded, apparently satisfied with the apology, but the air between us had changed. We both felt it, though neither acknowledged it aloud. Later that night, I made a decision. Next Thursday evening, instead of working late as planned, I would find out exactly where Caroline went during her regular meetings. Part of me dreaded confirming what I already suspected, but I needed to know the truth, no matter how painful. 3 weeks later, I stood in a hospital delivery room watching my world collapse. The baby, a girl, had just been placed in Caroline's arms after hours of labor. Her skin was a deep brown, her features clearly indicating African American heritage that neither Caroline nor I possessed. The moment stretched into an unbearable silence. The doctor avoided my eyes, suddenly very focused on medical charts. The nurse, checking vitals, glanced between Caroline and me with poorly concealed discomfort. And Caroline, her face showed not confusion, but panic. My mind flashed back to the previous Thursday when I had followed her to Westbrook Towers. I'd watched from my car as she used a key to enter not the main lobby, but a specific ground-floor apartment. Through partly opened blinds, I'd seen her embrace a tall black man before the blinds closed completely. I'd sat there for 2 hours before she emerged, never approaching, never confronting. I'd needed time to process what I'd seen, to decide how to handle it. I'd planned to confront her the next day, but she'd gone into labor that night, a week earlier than expected. Now, standing in the harsh fluorescent light of the delivery room, no confrontation was necessary. The truth lay in her arms, undeniable. "Mark," Carolyn began, her voice strained. "I can explain." "No," I said quietly. "You can't." I looked directly at her, mustering every ounce of dignity I possessed. "I know." The simplicity of those 2 words seemed to deflate her. No accusations, no questions, just acknowledgement of a truth we could no longer pretend didn't exist. I walked out of the room, ignoring her calls for me to come back. In the hallway, I leaned against the wall, legs suddenly unsteady. A strange calm descended over me, despite the chaos in my mind. 20 years of marriage, ending in this public humiliation. The future I'd planned vanished in an instant. I found my way to a small waiting area, mercifully empty, and sat staring at nothing. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence, 3:17 in the morning. The hour my life divided into before and after. "Mr. Harris?" A nurse I hadn't seen before stood in the doorway, holding a cup of coffee. "Thought you might need this." I took it automatically. "Thank you." "Sarah," she supplied, her kind eyes showing neither pity nor judgment. "I'm going to check on your wife, but I wanted to make sure you were okay first." "I'm not sure okay is the right word," I managed. "But I appreciate the coffee." She nodded, hesitating. "Is there someone I can call for you?" The question made me realize how alone I was in this moment. "Yes, actually, my friend David Reynolds." I gave her his number from my phone. Tell him I need him." After she left, I sat holding the coffee, its warmth against my palms, the only thing that felt real. Images flashed through my mind. Caroline's face when she told me she was pregnant. My father's tools I'd used to build the crib. The yellow paint I'd so carefully selected. All those months of planning, all based on a lie. I thought of the Thursday night I'd followed Caroline, how I'd driven home in a fog of disbelief, how I'd lain awake all night next to her, contemplating the depth of deception required to maintain such a double life. More than a year of calculated lies. The pregnancy itself, perhaps the biggest lie of all, letting me believe I was finally becoming a father when she must have known it was impossible. David arrived 45 minutes later, still wearing the sweatpants and t-shirt he'd clearly been sleeping in. Without a word, he sat beside me, his presence a silent support. "I don't know what to do next," I finally said. "You don't have to know right now," he replied. "But when you're ready, I'll help you figure it out." His calm practicality was exactly what I needed. "I can't go back in there." "No one expects you to." David leaned forward, elbows on knees. "You can stay at my place as long as you need." "No pressure, no decisions tonight." "I should have seen it sooner," I said, the regret rising like bile. "All the signs were there." "Don't do that to yourself, Mark. Caroline worked very hard to hide this from you. That's on her, not you." I nodded, though self-recrimination still burned. "How do I face people?" "Everyone will know." "With dignity," David said simply. "The same way you faced everything in your life, one step at a time." We sat in silence for several minutes before I finally stood. "I want to leave before she's moved to a recovery room. I can't see her right now." "Let's go then. My guest room is ready whenever you are." As we walked through the hushed hospital corridors, I felt simultaneously numb and hyper-aware. The fluorescent lights, the antiseptic smell, the occasional night shift nurse glancing curiously at us, everything registered with painful clarity. This was the beginning of my new reality, one I hadn't chosen but now had to navigate. In David's car, as the hospital receded in the side mirror, I made my first concrete decision. I need a good divorce attorney. "I know just the person," David said, his voice reflecting both compassion and the professional shift I needed. "James Martinez, best in the city for cases like this." "Make the call in the morning," I said, watching the empty pre-dawn streets pass by. "And I need to collect some things from the house while Caroline's in the hospital. We'll go tomorrow. Make a list of what you need immediately versus what can wait." David's home was a welcome sanctuary, his guest room simple and impersonal in exactly the way I needed. No shared memories, no photographs, no reminders of the life I'd thought I had. As he showed me where everything was, the reality of my situation finally hit with full force. I was effectively homeless at 58, my marriage over, my future uncertain. "Get some sleep if you can," David said, placing a supportive hand on my shoulder. "Things will look different in the daylight. Not better necessarily, but clearer." After he left, I sat on the edge of the bed, thoughts turning not to the past, but to what came next. The nursery I'd never use, the house that no longer felt like home, the legal complexities of ending a 20-year marriage. For the first time, I felt a spark of something beyond shock and pain. Determination, perhaps. I'd been a fool, but I wouldn't remain one. I would face this with the same methodical approach I brought to engineering problems, step by step, with careful planning and precise execution. I might have lost my dignity in that delivery room, but I would reclaim it in what came next. Adultery generally doesn't impact division of assets in our state, James Martinez explained 3 days later, but there are exceptions when the infidelity involved financial misconduct. We sat in his well-appointed office, the downtown skyline visible through floor-to-ceiling windows. David had made the introduction, then excused himself to give us privacy. Financial misconduct? I asked, using marital assets to support the affair. Martinez opened the folder I'd provided. These hotel charges, jewelry purchases, dinners, all on joint credit cards, potentially qualify, especially given the duration. I'd spent the previous day organizing financial records, discovering even more evidence than I'd initially found. Caroline had been meticulous about deleting text messages and hiding physical evidence, but she'd been careless with finances, perhaps assuming I wouldn't look closely at our comfortable bank accounts. "What about the house?" I asked. The colonial we'd purchased 15 years ago represented our largest shared asset. "You mentioned it was your father's inheritance that provided the down payment?" I nodded. $200,000. We've both contributed to the mortgage since then. That helps your position significantly. Martinez made notes. "Do you have documentation of that inheritance?" "Yes, and something else." I pulled out another folder. "My father left me a property in Vermont, a cabin on 10 acres. Caroline doesn't know about it. The deed is only in my name." Martinez looked up, his expression shifting to one of increased confidence. "That's very helpful. Any other separate assets she might not be aware of?" "A retirement account I established before our marriage. I've continued contributing to it separately from our joint investments." "Mark," Martinez said, setting down his pen, "you're in a much stronger position than most clients I see. Your meticulous record-keeping and separate assets give us significant leverage." For the first time since that night in the hospital, I felt a glimmer of control returning. My lifelong habit of careful documentation and financial prudence, traits Caroline had sometimes teased me about, now formed a foundation for whatever came next. "What's our next step?" "I'll prepare divorce papers. Given the circumstances, I recommend moving quickly while the evidence is fresh and before she can develop counter-narratives." I thought of Caroline, still in the hospital with her daughter, not our daughter, her daughter. She'll be discharged tomorrow. Then I suggest retrieving any essential items from your home today. Once she returns, the dynamics will get more complicated. He hesitated. "Have you had any contact since that night?" "No. She's called several times. I haven't answered." "That's appropriate for now. Once she's served with divorce papers, all communication should go through me." Martinez closed his folder. "One more question. Is there any chance this child could be yours?" The question hit like a physical blow, though I'd had the same thought repeatedly. "No. Physically impossible." Martinez nodded without pressing further. "Then we have a clear case. I'll have papers ready for your review by tomorrow afternoon." After leaving the attorney's office, I met with Rebecca Chen, a financial advisor David had recommended. In her office, we reviewed my complete financial picture. "You've been very thorough," Rebecca noted, examining the spreadsheets I'd prepared. "Many clients in your situation struggle to organize this level of detail, especially under emotional stress." "Organization helps me think," I admitted. "And right now, focusing on practical matters keeps me from dwelling on other things." She nodded understandingly. "Let's make sure your separate accounts are properly protected. I recommend changing all passwords immediately and checking your credit report for any accounts you might not be aware of. We spent the next hour developing a financial strategy, securing my assets, establishing new accounts at a different bank, and creating a budget for my new circumstances. The concrete steps provided a framework for moving forward when so much felt uncertain. Later that afternoon, David accompanied me to the house. Caroline wouldn't be discharged until the following day, giving me a window to collect what I needed without confrontation. Standing in the foyer of what had been my home for 15 years felt surreal. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it the night we rushed to the hospital, yet everything had changed. "Where do you want to start?" David asked. "My office." Important documents first. We worked methodically through the house, gathering clothes, personal items, family photographs, and documents. I avoided the nursery entirely, unable to face the physical manifestation of so many false hopes. In our bedroom, the bedroom, I packed quickly, taking only what was undeniably mine. On the dresser sat Caroline's jewelry box. I opened it, finding the diamond earrings I'd given her for our 15th anniversary nested among newer pieces I didn't recognize, likely gifts from him. I closed the box, leaving everything inside. I wanted nothing that would remind me of her. As we loaded the last boxes into David's SUV, I spotted a wooden case in the garage. My father's tools, the ones I'd used to build the crib, the ones I'd planned to someday pass down. I added them to the vehicle, one tangible connection to the future I'd imagined that I could repurpose for whatever came next. Back at David's house, I discovered an unexpected therapeutic outlet. His garage had a small workbench, and that evening I found myself opening my father's toolbox, the familiar smell of wood oil and metal bringing both comfort and grief. I selected a piece of maple from David's scrap pile and began shaping it without any particular project in mind, simply letting my hands remember what to do. "I didn't know you were a woodworker," David remarked, bringing me a beer. "My father taught me. It's been years since I've made anything just for the sake of it." I ran my hand over the emerging curve in the wood. "Most recently, I built a crib that will never be used." David leaned against the workbench. "Maybe this is a skill you can rediscover, something that's just yours." I nodded, continuing to work as we talked about practical next steps. By the time I set the tools down hours later, the shapeless wood had become the beginning of a small box. Nothing special, but something created by my hands alone. A small act of reclamation. That night, reviewing everything that had happened with Martinez and Chen, I felt the first real stirrings of a plan beyond mere reaction. I had resources, financial, legal, and personal, that Caroline might not have anticipated. I had support from true friends. And perhaps most importantly, I had the clarity that comes with absolute certainty. There would be no reconciliation, no attempts to salvage what had been irreparably broken. There was only forward movement now, one careful step at a time. 1 week after the birth, I sat in what had been our living room, waiting. Caroline would be arriving any minute, expecting to find the house empty. Instead, she would find me, divorce papers in hand, prepared to end our marriage with the same dignity she had tried to strip from me. The sound of her key in the lock sent my heart racing, but I remained seated, outwardly calm. She entered, a baby carrier in one hand, hospital bag in the other, and froze when she saw me. "Mark." My name came out as a whisper. She looked exhausted, her face pale except for the dark circles under her eyes. "You're here." "Briefly," I confirmed, not rising to help with her bags. My eyes flickered to the carrier where the infant slept, then back to Caroline's face. We need to talk, she said, setting down the carrier and bag. I know how this looks, but there's an explanation. I've had the DNA test results, I interrupted, a deliberate lie, but one I felt justified in using. There's nothing to explain, Caroline. Her shoulders sagged. Mark, please. 20 years together has to count for something. We can work through this. No, we can't. I indicated the envelope on the coffee table. Those are divorce papers. My attorney will be in touch with yours. She stared at the envelope, then back at me, shock giving way to calculation. You're angry. You have every right to be. But making permanent decisions in the heat of emotion isn't like you. This isn't heat. It's clarity. I stood, maintaining the distance between us. I've been gathering evidence for weeks, Caroline. The credit card statements, the hotel charges, the Thursday night meetings that weren't meetings at all. Her expression shifted, surprise flashing briefly before her features hardened. You've been spying on me? Checking credit cards? Following me? I've been discovering the truth you worked so hard to hide. There's a difference. And now you think you can just throw away 20 years, just like that? Her voice rose slightly, waking the baby who began to fuss. Caroline automatically moved to the carrier, her attention divided. You threw it away, I corrected calmly. Not me. Every time you lied. Every time you used our resources to conduct your affair. Every time you let me believe that child was mine. She lifted the baby, cradling her, while maintaining eye contact with me. What do you want, Mark? Revenge? Public humiliation? To punish me? I want nothing from you, except a clean break. The papers detail a fair division of assets, considering the circumstances. My attorney has documentation of everything, the affair, the financial misconduct, all of it. Financial misconduct? Her laugh held no humor. That's ridiculous. The court won't think so. I moved toward the door, having said what I came to say. I've collected my essential belongings. I'll arrange to get the rest later. Where are you staying? She asked, a note of something like desperation entering her voice. That's no longer your concern. As I reached the door, she called after me. You'll regret this, Mark. When you calm down, you'll realize what you're throwing away. I turned back one last time. The only thing I regret is not seeing the truth sooner. The person I thought I married never existed. The door closed behind me with a quiet finality. In my car, I allowed myself a moment to breathe, hands shaking slightly on the steering wheel. The confrontation had gone exactly as I'd planned, calm, factual, brief. Yet the emotional toll was significant. Seeing Caroline with the baby had been harder than anticipated, a visceral reminder of what should have been mine. 2 days later, while working at my temporary desk in a quiet corner of my company's engineering department, I looked up to find Caroline standing there, clearly having bypassed reception. Several colleagues glanced our way curiously. We need to talk, she said without preamble. You can't just shut me out like this. This isn't the place, I replied quietly, and I have nothing more to say. You've blocked my calls. You won't respond to messages. You're acting like I'm some criminal. I stood, guiding her toward a small conference room for privacy, acutely aware of the attention we were attracting. Once inside, I closed the door, but remained standing, maintaining physical distance. What do you want, Caroline? I want you to be reasonable. These divorce terms are punitive, and you know it. Her voice took on the persuasive tone she used so effectively in her professional life. We built a life together, Mark. One mistake, I interrupted, keeping my voice low but intense. This wasn't one mistake. It was hundreds of deliberate choices over more than a year. Each lie, each deception, Each time you came home to me after being with him. I never meant to hurt you. Yet you did, in the most profound way possible. I met her gaze steadily. You had me build a nursery, Caroline. You watched me plan for a child you knew couldn't be mine. What kind of person does that? For the first time, something like genuine remorse crossed her face. It got complicated. I didn't know how to tell you, and then it just snowballed. Well, it's not complicated anymore. It's very simple. Our marriage is over. All communication goes through our attorneys from now on. I moved toward the door. Please don't come to my workplace again. Mark. She reached for my arm, but I stepped back. This conversation is over. Please respect my workplace boundaries. As I opened the door, my department head, Alan, stood there with concerned eyes. Everything okay here, Mark? Ms. Harris was just leaving, I said formally. Caroline gathered her composure, nodded stiffly to Alan, and walked out. As she left, I saw several colleagues quickly avert their eyes, pretending they hadn't been watching the drama unfold. Thanks, Alan, I said quietly. No problem. He hesitated. Take the rest of the day if you need it. We've got the Westridge project covered. I nodded gratefully, gathering my things. The public confrontation had left me drained, yet I felt a certain satisfaction in having maintained my composure. Caroline had expected emotion. Anger she could argue with. Pain she could exploit. My calm factuality left her with nothing to manipulate. The following weekend, I received a text from Lisa, Caroline's sister. Coffee? Need to talk about C. Important. I agreed to meet at a neutral cafe, curious but cautious. Lisa had always been cordial, but her loyalty to Caroline was absolute. I arrived early, selecting a table with a clear view of the entrance. Lisa appeared precisely on time, looking uncomfortable as she sat across from me. Thank you for meeting me. What's this about, Lisa? Caroline is struggling, she began without preamble. The baby, the divorce, it's a lot. I imagine it is, I replied neutrally. She made a terrible mistake, Mark. She knows that. But for the baby's sake, stop. I held up a hand. If you're here to advocate for reconciliation, you're wasting both our time. Lisa leaned forward. You were married for 20 years. Doesn't that mean anything to you? This baby needs stability, a father figure. A father figure? I repeated, incredulous. Lisa, Caroline deliberately led me to believe I was the father while knowing that was impossible. She watched me build a nursery, plan for a future, all based on a lie. She's told people you're just going through a rough patch, Lisa continued, ignoring my point, that you'll come around once you've processed everything. She says no one needs to know the details. The implications clicked into place. She's lying about the baby's paternity to others, isn't she? Creating a narrative where I'm the unreasonable one? Lisa's uncomfortable expression confirmed my suspicion. She's trying to protect her reputation. And the babies? At my expense. I sat back, a calm certainty settling over me. Does her lover know she's presenting their child as mine? Lisa flinched. Marcus has complicated things. He's not exactly stepping up. So, I'm supposed to rescue Caroline from the consequences of her actions? Pretend to be the father of another man's child to save her reputation? When you put it like that, there's no other way to put it. I stood, placing money on the table for both our coffees. Please tell Caroline that from now on, all communication goes through our attorneys. And Lisa, I paused, looking directly at her. You knew about the affair, didn't you? All along. Her eyes dropped, unable to meet mine. I thought it would burn itself out. You watched me plan for a child that wasn't mine, knowing the truth. Remember that when you judge my unwillingness to come around." I left the cafe with renewed resolve. Caroline wasn't just trying to manipulate me privately, she was creating a public narrative that cast me as the villain. The time for quiet dignity had passed. I needed to protect not just my assets, but my reputation. That evening, I called Martinez and updated him on both encounters. "She's trying to control the narrative," I concluded, "telling people I'm the father, that this is just a rough patch." "This changes our approach," Martinez said decisively. "We need to accelerate the filing and include specific language about paternity. I recommend we proceed to formal court proceedings rather than mediation." "Do whatever's necessary," I agreed. "I won't be manipulated any further." The next morning, I called Alan and requested a brief meeting. Though I'd maintained privacy about my situation, Caroline's workplace visit had created speculation. It was time for limited transparency. "I'm going through a divorce," I told him simply. "I've tried to keep it separate from work, but as you saw, that's becoming difficult." Alan nodded. "I assumed as much. Anything you need from us?" "Just understanding if I need flexibility for legal appointments. And if Caroline appears again, please have security escort her out." "Consider it done," he assured me. "For what it's worth, Mark, everyone here respects your professionalism through whatever this is. That counts for something." His support meant more than I could express. As news of my divorce inevitably spread, I found colleagues offering quiet support, lunch invitations, normal conversation, no prying questions. Their respect reinforced my determination to handle this with dignity, even as I took more assertive steps to protect myself. By month's end, the divorce filing was public record, including the paternity issue. I'd authorized Martinez to be direct but not vindictive in the filing language. The facts alone were damning enough without embellishment. The truth, it turned out, was the most powerful tool in my arsenal, not weaponized, not exaggerated, just illuminated after too long in shadow. 6 weeks after that night in the delivery room, I sat beside Martinez in family court, watching Caroline and her attorney across the aisle. She'd chosen a navy blue dress with a conservative cut, her hair pulled back, the picture of respectability. The baby, thankfully, was absent. Judge Matthews, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, reviewed the file before addressing us. "This is an initial hearing for Harris versus Harris. I understand attempts at mediation have failed." "That's correct, Your Honor," Martinez confirmed. "Despite our client's reasonable proposals, Mrs. Harris has rejected all settlement offers." Caroline's attorney, a polished woman named Suzanne Delaney, leaned forward. "My client is seeking an equitable division of assets from a 20-year marriage, Your Honor. Mr. Harris's proposals have been punitive and unreasonable." Judge Matthews raised an eyebrow. "I've reviewed the filings, including the evidence of adultery and financial misconduct. Equitable may not mean what you think it means in this context, Ms. Delaney." A small ripple of reaction went through the courtroom. Several former colleagues of mine sat in the back row, having come to show support. I'd been touched when they'd appeared, silent allies in what could have been a lonely process. The judge continued reviewing documents, occasionally looking up over her glasses. "Mr. Harris, you're claiming the minor child is not yours and are requesting a formal declaration to that effect." "Yes, Your Honor," Martinez answered. "DNA testing has confirmed Mr. Harris is not the biological father." Caroline shifted uncomfortably beside her attorney, who quickly responded, "My client acknowledges that fact, Your Honor, but notes that Mr. Harris was preparing to raise this child and showed every intention of being her father before abruptly abandoning his responsibilities. The mischaracterization made my jaw tighten, but Martinez placed a calming hand on my arm. Your Honor, Mr. Harris was deliberately misled regarding paternity. Documentation shows Mrs. Harris knowingly allowed him to believe he was the father while maintaining an ongoing relationship with the actual father. Judge Matthews's expression darkened. Is that accurate, Mrs. Harris? Caroline conferred briefly with her attorney before responding. The situation is complicated, Your Honor. I never explicitly claimed. Please answer the question directly, the judge interrupted. Did you allow your husband to believe he was the father while knowing that was not the case? After a long pause, Caroline answered quietly, yes. The simple admission carried more weight than hours of argument could have. Judge Matthews made a note before continuing with procedural matters, setting dates for financial disclosure reviews and the next hearing. As the proceedings concluded, I remained seated, letting most people filter out before standing. Caroline appeared to be waiting to approach me, but Martinez smoothly guided me toward a side door. Mark? A woman's voice stopped me, unfamiliar but somehow insistent. I turned to find a well-dressed black woman about my age, her expression a complex mixture of anger and determination. My name is Vanessa Wright, she said, extending her hand formally. I believe we should talk. Martinez looked concerned, but I recognized the name immediately. Marcus Wright's wife. She nodded, a flicker of pain crossing her features. Ex-wife, as of last month. Could I have a few minutes of your time? We found a quiet corner of the courthouse cafe, Martinez hovering nearby, but giving us privacy. Vanessa sat with perfect posture, hands clasped on the table. Yet I want to apologize, she began, surprising me. Not for Marcus, he'll answer for himself, but because I suspected something long before the baby was born and said nothing. You knew about Caroline? I asked. I knew he was having an affair. I found hotel receipts just like you did, but I didn't know who she was until... She paused. Until I saw the birth announcement in the paper with your name listed as the father. The revelation hit me hard. Caroline had actually published an announcement claiming I was the father, even after the truth was undeniable. I confronted Marcus immediately, Vanessa continued. He admitted everything, the year-long affair, the baby, all of it. What he didn't expect was that I'd contact you. I appreciate that you did, I said sincerely. You should also know that Marcus has no intention of being involved with the child. Her voice held a complex emotion I couldn't quite identify. He told Caroline this repeatedly during the pregnancy. He never wanted children. It was a major factor in our divorce. So she knew, I said, pieces clicking into place. She knew he wouldn't be a father to this child, which is why she needed me to believe it was mine. Vanessa nodded. Marcus said she became inconveniently pregnant and decided to make it work with you rather than face single motherhood. The calculated nature of the deception staggered me. Not just an affair discovered, but a deliberate plan to use me as an unwitting stepfather. I have documentation, Vanessa added, sliding a folder across the table. Text messages between them that Marcus carelessly left accessible on our shared tablet. Conversations about the pregnancy, about you, about their plans. I thought they might help your case. I stared at the folder, overwhelmed by her unexpected alliance. Why are you doing this? Because lies destroy lives, she said simply. Mine, yours. Eventually, they'll destroy Caroline and Marcus too. The truth is the only path forward for any of us. As we parted, I found myself respecting this woman who'd chosen integrity despite her own pain. Her intervention provided not just additional evidence, but something I hadn't expected: the validation of having another person fully understand the betrayal I'd experienced. When I shared Vanessa's documents with Martinez, his expression shifted from professional interest to genuine shock. These messages are explicit about the deception. Caroline clearly stating, "You aren't the father," discussing how to prevent you from discovering the truth. This changes everything. How so? Judge Matthews was already inclined toward your position, but with these, he tapped the folder. Caroline has no ground to stand on. I recommend we submit these immediately and request an expedited final hearing. 2 weeks later, we returned to court. The atmosphere had changed dramatically. Caroline's attorney appeared subdued, Caroline herself pale and tense. Judge Matthews wasted no time addressing the new evidence. "In light of the additional documentation, Mrs. Harris, does your position on asset division remain the same?" Caroline's attorney responded carefully. "My client is now willing to accept Mr. Harris's original settlement proposal, Your Honor." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Martinez looked at me questioningly, and I nodded my agreement. "Very well," Judge Matthews continued. "Regarding the paternity matter, this court finds clear and convincing evidence that Mr. Harris is not the biological father of the minor child born to Mrs. Harris on April 12th. Furthermore, the court finds that Mrs. Harris knowingly misrepresented paternity to Mr. Harris, constituting fraud." Each word felt like vindication, the official acknowledgement of truth I'd been seeking. "The court approves the settlement agreement as presented," Judge Matthews concluded. "I'll sign the final divorce decree today. This marriage is dissolved." As we left the courtroom, I noticed several of Caroline's friends who had once been mutual acquaintances. Their expressions held varying degrees of shock and reassessment. The narrative she'd been constructing had crumbled under the weight of documented truth. In the hallway, Caroline made one last attempt to approach me, but Martinez smoothly intercepted her, directing her toward her own attorney. Our eyes met briefly across the distance, hers pleading, mine resolved. No words were necessary. Everything that needed saying had been said in that courtroom. Outside, standing on the courthouse steps in the spring sunshine, I felt a curious lightness. Not happiness exactly. The wounds were still too fresh for that, but perhaps the beginning of freedom. The legal battle was over. The truth had been officially recognized. Now came the harder part, building whatever came next. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I stood in the center of my new home, a modest 2-bedroom condominium across town, surveying the transformation. The walls, once builder beige, now wore the slate blue I'd selected. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes I'd collected over decades. The furniture was a mix of carefully chosen new pieces and a few favorites from my previous life. Nothing here held memories of Caroline. Every choice reflected only my preferences, my taste, my life moving forward. The dining table I'd built myself from cherry wood, salvaged from my father's property in Vermont, dominated the eating area, my first major woodworking project since rediscovering the craft. The doorbell rang, heralding the arrival of guests for my housewarming dinner. David and his wife Sarah were first, bearing wine and genuine smiles. Eleanor followed, her warm hug communicating more than words. Several colleagues arrived next, including Alan and his wife. The small gathering represented my reconstituted support network, some old friends, some new connections, all people who had demonstrated their genuine care during the past difficult months. "This place suits you," Eleanor commented, admiring the clean lines and understated decor. It feels peaceful." "That was the goal," I agreed, pouring her a glass of wine. "A fresh start deserves a calm foundation." Over dinner, conversation flowed easily, touching on work projects, neighborhood news, and future plans. No one mentioned Caroline or the divorce directly, yet there was a tacit acknowledgement in how they engaged with me, treating me not as someone damaged by betrayal, but as a whole person moving forward. As the evening wound down, David lingered to help with cleanup. "You seem good, Mark. Better than I would have expected 6 months ago." "I am," I realized, somewhat surprised by the truth of it. "Not where I thought I'd be at this point in my life, but good nonetheless." "Any regrets about how you handled things?" I considered the question carefully. "I regret not seeing the truth sooner. But once I knew, no. I needed the clean break, the official acknowledgement. It wasn't about punishing Caroline. It was about reclaiming my own life." David nodded. "You did it with remarkable dignity. Not everyone could have." After he left, I sat alone in my new living room, reflecting on the journey of the past 6 months. The initial shock and pain had given way to methodical reconstruction, finding an apartment, then this condo, establishing new routines, reconnecting with old interests, building furniture with my hands when emotions became overwhelming. There had been difficult moments, certainly, running into mutual friends who'd heard only Caroline's version of events, driving past our old house and seeing unfamiliar cars in the driveway after she sold it. The unexpected waves of grief for the future I'd thought I would have. But there had also been surprising discoveries, the relief of decisions made solely for myself, the satisfaction of creating a space that reflected only my preferences, the deepened friendships with people who'd stood by me without judgment. 2 weeks later, I found myself sharing these reflections with Michael, a younger colleague going through his own divorce. "I don't know how you stayed so composed," he admitted, as we walked through the park on our lunch break. "I feel like I'm falling apart some days." "I had my moments," I assured him. "The difference is, I didn't make decisions during those moments." "How did you avoid becoming bitter?" Michael asked. "That's what I'm struggling with most. The anger just eats at me." I considered his question, watching a pair of squirrels chase each other up a tree. I realized bitterness would only extend Caroline's power over my life. Every day I spent angry was another day she determined how I felt, what I thought about. "That's profound," Michael said quietly. "Not really, just practical. Bitterness is exhausting." I decided my energy was better spent rebuilding. We walked in companionable silence for a while before Michael spoke again. "Thanks for talking with me about this. Most people just offer platitudes." "Platitudes don't help much when your life's been upended," I agreed. "What helps is knowing you can create something new from what remains." That weekend, I taught a woodworking class at the community center, something I'd started doing monthly as both a way to share my father's legacy and connect with others. The act of creating something tangible, of guiding others to do the same, had become an unexpected source of satisfaction. As I demonstrated how to use a plane properly, I caught sight of an unfamiliar woman in the back row, watching intently. Later, as students worked on their projects, she approached my workbench. "I'm Susan Garrett," she introduced herself. "I'm the center's new program coordinator. I wanted to see your class in action. It's our most popular weekend offering." "Mark Harris," I replied, wiping sawdust from my hands before shaking hers. "I'm glad to hear it's well received." "Very much so." She glanced at the half-finished jewelry box on my bench. "Your father taught you woodworking, right? That's what Dr. Reynolds mentioned when he suggested you as an instructor." "He did. Started when I was 12. I ran my hand over the dovetail joint I'd been demonstrating. "I rediscovered it recently. Found it helps me think. The tangible result of problem solving. Susan nodded. I get that. I garden for the same reason. Our conversation shifted to the community center's programs, potential expansions, her recent move to the area. There was something refreshingly straightforward about her manner. Intelligent, interested, but without any apparent agenda. As class wrapped up, she handed me her card. I'd love to discuss expanding the woodworking program over coffee sometime. We've had requests for more advanced classes. I'd like that, I said, surprised by my own immediate positive response. Later that afternoon, I visited my father's grave, something I did monthly. The cemetery was peaceful, late autumn leaves drifting across the manicured grounds. I placed fresh flowers in the permanent vase and sat on the small bench nearby. You would have been proud of the jewelry box design, I said quietly, continuing our one-sided conversations. The students picked up the dovetail technique faster than I expected. The wind rustled through nearby trees, nature's only response. Yet speaking to him, even knowing he couldn't hear, provided a connection to my past that felt important to maintain. I'm doing well, Dad. Building a life I didn't expect, but one that feels increasingly like mine. I paused, organizing thoughts I'd been reluctant to articulate even to myself. I met someone today, just a professional connection, but there was something there. An ease. It's probably nothing, but it reminded me that connections are still possible. As I drove home, I reflected on how much had changed in 6 months. The devastation that had seemed unsurvivable had gradually given way to something new. Not a replacement for what was lost, but a different life with its own potential value. My phone buzzed with a text from Susan about possible dates for coffee to discuss the woodworking program. Looking at it, I felt a flutter of something I hadn't experienced in months. Simple anticipation, untainted by past betrayals. I would always carry the scars of Caroline's deception. But sitting in my car, planning a response about coffee with a straightforward woman who shared my appreciation for creating tangible things, I realized those scars no longer defined my future. They were simply part of the foundation upon which I was building something new. The truest measure of dignity isn't found in never falling, but in how we rise after being knocked down. When betrayal shatters our assumptions about our lives, we face a profound choice: remain defined by what was done to us or reclaim authorship of our own story. Through Mark's journey, I've come to believe that true dignity requires both compassion and strength, the compassion to acknowledge our pain without shame, and the strength to move forward without being consumed by bitterness. The balance is delicate and personal, different for each of us facing life's unexpected turns. Many of you reading this have experienced betrayals of trust, perhaps not identical to Mark's, but painful nonetheless. The colleague who took credit for your work, the friend who shared confidences, the family member who chose their comfort over your boundaries. Each instance leaves us questioning not just the other person, but our own judgment. What I've learned is that our response to betrayal reveals more about our character than the betrayal itself ever could. When we choose integrity over vindictiveness, clarity over denial, and forward movement over stagnation, we reclaim something essential that no one can take without our permission: our self-respect. This reclamation isn't about pretending the pain never happened. It's about refusing to allow that pain to determine our future. It's about recognizing that starting over at any age, whether 58 or 78, is preferable to living without the dignity that comes from honoring our own worth. As you reflect on your own experiences, consider where you might need to establish clearer boundaries, where you might be carrying unnecessary bitterness, or where you might reclaim parts of yourself set aside in relationship with others. The journey forward begins with that first, deliberate step toward authentic living.